Okay, so here's a few things I want to say about Sonic 4 Episode 2, and why, based on what we've seen so far, I think it may be much better than the first episode, which I found pretty underwhelming overall. First, let's talk about the enemies. I think it's pretty stupid that Bubbles is still there. I mean, not only does he not have the spikes to defend himself with, but he can't even move. How does he challenge the player, at all? I think it's safe to assume these guys will function pretty much the same way they did in the first episode. These guys are such pitiful enemies, and their character models may as well just be discs with a target painted on it, like the sort of thing you'd see in tutorials. I mean, let's face it, that's why they're there, so inexperienced noobs can practice using the homing attack on an enemy that just can't fight back. Hopefully we'll at least see some competent red ones, then they won't appear in almost every level. But you know what? I really like the enemies. On one hand, yeah, we've got a few rehashed badniks that we all met back in the day and don't want to meet again, but the designers have gone far to change certain ones for the better, and some of these guys aren't even from the main series. The kind of really obscure badniks, supposedly found in the Game Gear games and whatnot. The kind most people won't even remember too well. And, at the very least, it's nice that if Sonic Team just has to retool a few of these guys, they've at least gone out of their way to bring some of the lesser-known badniks into the limelight. And even then, there's a few of these guys that I've never seen before, so yay, new enemies, finally! And if that isn't enough, look at this boss. I'm gonna be sorely disappointed if this thing isn't in the game because it looks friggin' awesome. Now this is a breath of fresh air. This is a sort of boss we should have gotten in episode 1, and it just might one-up the bosses from 3K like the enemies you find in a sequel are supposed to. I can't wait to see the other bosses, and if the final boss is also going to be something completely new and original, I don't know what to say. I really like that polar bear badnik. Kinda reminds me of a polar bear enemy from Mega Man ZX that would toss chunks of ice at you, which I also liked. Anyway, some people don't like that you apparently have to hit him more than one time, but I don't mind. I mean, let's face it, the homing attack is a stupid gimmick to have in a 2D game, and it makes fighting enemies ridiculously easy. So, if they feel they just have to include this gimmick, at least enemies like this actually sport a fighting chance against you now. So what's the big guy's name? Snowy. Snowy the Bear. Whatever. Now let's talk about the zones. So far, we appear to have a green ruins sort of place, a winter level, a carnival level, and an industrialized crapsack zone. Apparently, there are only 4 zones, just like in episode 1, which is something of a disappointment. When you peel away all the visuals and whatever, leave out the bosses and forget the concept of acts 1, 2, 3, and so on, the first episode had 12 stages, but it felt like 4. So they could have just as many stages in this game, but, give them a few more flavors. I'd rather have 6 zones each with 2 acts than 4 zones with 3 acts. But for now, let's just look at the zones we do have, however few they may be. None of them really feel like rehashes of previous zones. Well, you could say the first zone, Sylvania Castle, awesome Castlevania reference by the way, shares a few similarities with Aquatic Ruin and will apparently be featuring some gimmicks from Marble Garden, but it doesn't really feel like either of them. The pine trees, the structure suspended hundreds of feet in the air, even just the colors of the sky. This is not an HD ripoff or carbon copy of any previous zone. It feels like an almost completely new zone that simply has a few little things left over from other zones that make it reminiscent of them. And no, that is not the same as just being a blatant ripoff. But even that stops with the first level. And even then, it's so much more refreshing and unique than just getting yet another of the many bullshit Green Hill-inspired opening stages that we've gotten over the years. Contrary to what some may think, no, guys like me do not just want to play the same thing over and over again forever. And this is a welcome departure from your typical Sonic opening stage. And then there's that snowy level. We've had plenty of those, so I won't call this a rip-off of Ice Cap of all places, like that's the only winter-themed level we've ever seen. White Park, as it's supposedly called, actually feels a lot more like the various snowy levels from throughout the advanced games. I mean, look at the Christmas trees, and the adorable Robotnik snowmen, and of course those wicked badass new polar bear super badniks named Snowy the Bear. Maybe other enemies pop out of the set pieces and surprise you, wouldn't that be cool? The oddly and pretty generically named Sky Fortress Zone may remind some of Carnival Night Zone, but come on, this doesn't look anything like that. The atmosphere and aesthetics are completely different, and that last zone, the name of which we don't know yet, some think is reminiscent of Oil Ocean, but I really don't see it. Even if oil kind of is the gimmick of this place, it doesn't remind me of Oil Ocean at all. The style and the visuals are just so different and dreary as frack. But we'll talk about this one some more in a bit. Overall, I really do like the look of these zones. The graphics are beautiful, and have so much more depth than those of the previous episode. I mean, everything I'm seeing makes the first look more and more like crap compared to this one, simply because this one looks so much better. I love the various graphics used for the sky, I love the fishies and the lights, and just all sorts of other things. I think it's nifty how each zone seems to segue into the next one. Not just the change from day to night, but maybe the first zone will end with an underwater area, and the snow level will start with an underwater stage that would be the main focus of the first act. And when you resurface, you're in a new place. Considering that White Park and the Sky Fortress are, in fact, two separate zones, I like that you can still see where you're headed long before you actually get there. I suppose you could compare it to how most of the levels in Sonic 3K transition from one to the next, but this is taking it a huge step further than that. In a recently released fan game, Sonic Before the Sequel, a lot of zones, and even just individual acts, would change the scenery while you were halfway through them, so the setting was constantly smoothly changing, instead of seemingly jumping from one landscape to a wildly different one in an instant, which is admittedly pretty jarring by comparison. I loved that, and I love that this seems to be taking the same direction. I hope the music will reflect how much more advanced this appears to be compared to Episode 1. I don't want to hear this garbly mess. I want to hear real music, like this. The trailer had some pretty nifty music, and maybe that's a part of the soundtrack. One can only hope. Let's talk about the gameplay footage. Now, I may be wrong, but in some of the instances shown, the physics appear to be a bit better than in Episode 1, as Sonic gets some hang time you just wouldn't be able to in that. If that is the case, though, then why are there still so many of those stupid speed boosters that steal control of the game from you and force you along while you watch Sonic run? Do they think that the player's thumbs will get too tired to hold down the D-pad after a few seconds and they need some help? Is it just more fun watching the game do something for you than actually doing it yourself? It does have me kind of worried, but if the physics do turn out to be better after all, well, great, but then that just makes these things even more useless and redundant. I mean, why are they even there? What's their purpose? Why do we need them? There's also a few more springs than I should like, but you know what? We've still hardly seen any of the game yet, and it can't be helped that when making a trailer of something, you want to make it really fast and hectic and flashy and whatnot. So maybe they just scrunched up most of the scripted events and cinematic bits, condensed them all into 1 minute, and just left all the actual gameplay out. Maybe there really aren't a lot of these things in the context of the whole game, but they're just making it look that way. Basically, from the looks of it, it's just a really dumb highlight reel, nothing more. I don't know. I'll just have to hope for the best. Also, it looks like red rings have become a thing now, and we'll be seeing them all the time from now on. They're a Sonic tradition, yay. I have absolutely no problem with this, though I have to wonder, assuming we can reach the special stages the same way you could in Episode 1, then what purpose do these serve? Do they unlock concept art and whatnot? If so, that's pretty sweet. And on another note, look at these special stages. Yeah, they're based on the special stages from Sonic 2, but so are the special stages of so many Sonic games that have had special stages in the last decade. Anyway, these look really cool. It'll be nice to see how they play. Hopefully Tails won't lag behind, you know? Instead of making these play the exact same way they did in Sonic 2, hopefully the designers have made improvements over whatever's been driving people nuts all these years. There's some cool joint attacks that Sonic and Tails perform together, and having a friend come along for the ride will no doubt add a lot to the gameplay, much more so than in Sonic 2, or Shadow the Hedgehog for that matter. Okay, so overall, this game looks really fucking good, pardon my French, and I'm really looking forward to this. At the very least, it does look like a big step up from Episode 1, and I can only hope that the gameplay reflects its good looks. If the game is the same as before and has just gotten a slick makeover while the gameplay hasn't been improved one bit, I will inevitably be disappointed, but ultimately, it does look better. Now there's one last thing to talk about. Before we go any further, let me just clarify that I'm continuing a topic I started in a previous video, and I advise you to watch that before proceeding with this, otherwise you'll probably have no idea what the frack I'm babbling about. If you do, and you're ready, let's wrap this up. See that weird planet in the background? The one you can see right in the first zone and in later zones? The one that you don't see in the last zone? Because Metal Sonic appears in this game, a lot of people are assuming that's just the little planet from Sonic CD which passes Sonic's world every now and then. But I don't think that's it. I mean, it's got the makings of what looks to be a new Death Egg being built around the planet with the eyes and mustache and everything. Some wonder if Robotnik may be planning to siphon energy out of the planet just like his bandits do to the flickies stored inside them, but on a massive scale. Could you imagine what that would be like? As sinister as it is, I don't think Robotnik is beyond that. Anyway, to put it simply, I think this planet just might be Earth. Well, the land masses don't look quite like ours, and it really isn't that likely, but I'd like to think this is possible. I have to wonder if this game is going to chronicle the exodus Sonic and Co. made to Earth from their planet that I theorized about in my last vid. Again, I can't be certain that that's what's going on, but I see the makings of such a plot, and I think it would be really cool and fresh. What really got me thinking this was this one screenshot we have of what appears to be the last zone, which is a very, very different vibe and atmosphere than the other 3 zones. The way I see it, the other zones could just be on either interpretation of Sonic's world, but at least they have some good old fantasy elements that make them feel more, Sonic-y. This doesn't have a shred of that. It's bleak, it's blighted, it's freaky, and I really dig it. This clashes with the rest of the game so harshly, I can't help thinking that once you beat Metal Sonic and take back Tails' rocket, you land on the surface of our world, and the final showdown with Robotnik takes place where he came from. I really hope this is the direction they'll take with the story, because it just seems fitting to me. The setup is there, and it would just be really cool to see this sort of story brought to life. But I suppose I've rambled on enough about that. That's all I have to say about Sonic 4 Episode 2 for now, peeps. I'll talk about it at a later date when we learn more about it. For now, toodles.